After the fall of the Nazi regime, there were two meetings with the top Allied leaders, Dwight D. Eisenhower, Joseph Stalin, Winston Churchill, and many more. The two conferences were the Yalta and Potsdam Conference. At the conferences, they discussed the fate of Germany and decided to divide Germany up into 4 territories. Eventually, they became one communist and one capitalist territory. The difference between communism and capitalism was the reason the wall was built. Once people saw they could go to a flourishing West German side compared to the slums of East Germany, 2 million people, mostly scientists and engineers, did. Only the lower-paying jobs that couldn't be sustained by the lower class remained, which made the east side fall into turmoil. So they built a wall to prevent the remaining higher-class jobs from leaving. It took the Soviets only 14 days to build with volunteers and workers. They eventually constructed an inner German border. Once the wall was complete, the East Germans started to learn what freedom meant and how it fueled people to rebel back and fight to gain their freedom in any possible way.
Rough. It had a lot of cement slabs that were, set into the ground. It would have barbed wire strands across the top, maybe concertina wire. There were places where they had put the wall. The wall actually was a wall of houses, like row houses. And I remember this one place that always caught my attention was there was a window that was bricked up and it still had the curtains hanging in. You had the glass, the window, curtains hanging that was bricked up behind it. And at that time, it was a very modern wall, and there were these cement slabs, pretty well finished. And then they had a well curve about that big around top, so if you were trying to climb over.
The Berlin Wall had a lot more effects on people than most people realize, because the wall kept people from both leaving and entering, and this made people have to resort in other options. The jobs that the majority of the people worked were shops and factories because most of the skilled workers left. The economy in West Berlin was booming and never been so prosperous. At the same time, their East Berlin counterparts lived in poverty, enduring scarce food supplies and items that were essential to daily life. They lacked housing and other shelters because of the bomb and artillery damage suffered during World War II. The average East German never saw exotic food. That means that they maybe got bread and water and just some of the benefits of extreme poverty like foods. One of the most notable things is that they didn't even take care of the roads. So when people could cross the wall, the streets were all cobblestone and dirt. Speaking of the upper-class jobs, the real upper-class jobs were the transportation operators for trains and airplanes. And even then, they still lived in torn-down houses and old war-stricken places. There was one East German who worked at an airport, and his story is an amazing one.
Well, I mean, they swarmed into West Berlin because the ability to buy consumer goods was just unbelievable. I mean, when the wall came down, I read an article that said that the average East German had never seen a banana. Cigarette holder, they just had just short about World War II damage and bomb damage or anything like that. But you got over East Berlin, it was very common. Well, it was probably about 7 or 8 foot tall.
Many people showed resilience against the wall, such as Hans Peter Strauss and Hartmann Richter, and finally Harry Dieterling, who all stood up against the communist Soviets. If these people didn't do what they did, they might have never lived or seen the light of day. It was 1977, and after watching a heart-blown documentary, Hans Peter Strauss decided to get out of this devilish place. So he and his buddy Gunter Wetzel started to make a hot air balloon out of propane tanks and bed sheets. After some trials and errors, they finally made it on 1979, September 6th. It took them an amazing 30 minutes to crash, becoming one of the many escapes that took place that stood up against the Soviets. But this next story made a human train wreck of the Soviets. In 1961, on December 5th, Harry Dieterling, an engineer, saw an unused railway. going to West Berlin. So he decided to get his friends and family on the train and attempt an escape. He took the air out of the brakes and dove full throttle into the wall. The Soviets didn't know what to do and dove out of the way. The train crashed to the wall and everyone yelled, "We made it!" This story showed how people didn't care if they died. They just wanted to make it to the other side, to be free. The final man shows us how freedom can become and by how others deserve the same. It was a foggy night and Hartmann Richter dived into the Teltow Canal and swam for 4 hours while ducking and avoiding being seen by guards. He finally made it, but passed out from hypothermia. But luckily people saw him. But a couple years later, he went back to East Berlin and saved 30 people, after which the Soviets captured him. Many people risked their lives to be free by crossing the border to the western side of the wall. With each attempt, they chipped away at the Soviet oppression to fight for their freedom and eventually break the barrier of the Berlin Wall. Most of the scientists and stuff, and the aircraft engineers, most of them went to West Berlin before the wall and stuff came up, right?
Well, if they could get away with it, they did. In fact, when I first moved to Des Moines in 1974, I worked for the city legal department, and one of the investigators that the law department had was Fullerton. He had been a sergeant in World War II, and after the war, he was on one of these teams that drove all over Germany, including the Eastern Zone, and they tried to snatch away the German rockets. And it was kind of by hook and by crook. Sometimes they would just grab them, other times they'd bribe them. Like, if you come over, we'll take you and we'll ship you to the United States.
The fall of the wall is one of the most critical moments in history because it showed that you could never keep people in with barriers. Everyone on both sides of the Berlin Wall is very thankful for the UK, America, and France for being there to protect them from the interests of the communist government. Now, the East Germans were not protected by the Power Three, but they were ready to pounce when the Soviets would give up. Still, the Soviets had other plans. They tried to starve the people out by blocking all imports there by land. But then the Berlin airlift happened, and they kept going on until the Soviets gave up the idea to stop them and rather outrace them. Many people spoke out for the poor people who lived in East Germany because they were living in terrible conditions. One of the most prominent speakers against the Berlin Wall was United States President Ronald Reagan, who wanted to put in a speech, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," but the state of Department of Bureaucrats was nervous, and Reagan wanted it in, and they finally let him in, and those 6 words changed the face of East Germany. People started to have faith that the wall would come down because they had something to rally around. And 2.5 years later, the wall fell.
Wedding. It was a military wedding, so I'm in our dress blues. And we went, after the party, was an Army officer, even the gals, Army nurses. And so they said, "Let's go downtown." And I said, "Downtown?" Where I was at out in Fulton, you never went to place uniform outside of duty. "Oh, we do it all the time." So we went to this restaurant bar called Zigeuner Keller, Gypsy Cellar. It was the basement of this big office. And halfway down there was this landing. So about 5 of us, all in uniform. We stopped because the place was just jam packed. We were looking for a table to sit, as you can see, and had a live band playing German music. And when it saw us, the band stopped. Everybody turns around and looks at us. The band started playing "God Bless America." Now that's a once in a lifetime experience. You know, the West Germans loved us because they realized that if we weren't there, they would be under the Russian.
The Berlin Wall is a historic barrier, but once it was broken, it showed the courage of the people and the will we all have, showing others what is the right way to go and the wrong way. The wall showed signs of freedom from many people, and it forced people to become heroes, such as Hartmann Richter, who went to the eastern side to save 30 people, and then being captured just for their freedom, not caring about his. People even spoke out against the wall, such as Ronald Reagan, who said one of the most famous lines ever.
"Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall."